So I want to once again just welcome everyone who has joined us today. My name is Mike from clearimit.com. Fantastic website offering many different advice, content, social areas where you can hang out, talk about business school, talk about your MBA program, and get some really good insight into each of the schools you may be interested in, including, and not limited to, the University of North Carolina, who we have today with a fantastic panel who will discuss many different topics today. And I want to start off by introducing the moderator for today's session, Danielle Richie, who is the Senior Associate Director of MBA Admissions and Student Recruitment at UNC Kenan-Flagler. So Danielle, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Hello and welcome to our webinar on diversity and leadership that's sponsored by UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School, as Mike mentioned, in partnership with ClearAdmit. My name is Danielle Richie, and I oversee the full-time MBA admissions and student recruitment here at UNC, and I will serve as your moderator today. But before we get started, we would like to gain a better understanding of our audience and what experience has been like so far on the topic of diversity. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and would love for you to respond in the chat box by saying yes or no. When you think about your organization, do you see the need to improve resources or training when it comes to educating and bringing awareness to the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion? If so, just quickly type in yes or no. Great. Love seeing the engagement so far. Excellent. Another question. Have you ever had a great idea for improving the diversity of leadership at your company or at your school? And panelists, feel free. You can use the chat box as well. So it looks like we all see the need for improvement. Okay. Okay, now, have you ever found it difficult to get the necessary resources or support to actually improve on this topic? Okay. Yes, absolutely, Sarah. Great response. Okay. My last question is, do you think of yourself as an inclusive leader? Okay. So, an astounding yes. I think everyone, oh, we even got a hell yes in there. And there's always room to improve. It's someone's job. Okay, perfect. So we are with a great audience. I love the engagement that's coming through already. So let's get started. Oop, my computer froze just a little bit. I'd like for y'all to sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation, and if you have questions throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A function throughout. But diversity, equity, inclusion continue to gain steam as organizations realize the vast benefits. Many firms are now putting in place a chief diversity officer role in their C-suite and investing in training in their employees. Schools, organizations, and people are realizing that development is the new equity. Today, we have a wonderful group of panelists, and I might be biased because they all come from UNC Kenan-Flagler, but they are here to discuss diversity and leadership. An MBA not only gives you the business skills, tools, and perspective to be successful in your career, but it also provides you the opportunity to navigate the social complexities of business, develop deep relationships, and lead a more purposeful life. Our hope today is that you learn more about UNC Kenan-Flagler's diverse and equitable community and discover how we're facilitating important discussions and practicing inclusion, and get insights about how an MBA is helping pave our students' way to becoming stronger leaders. This webinar, as I mentioned earlier, is meant to be interactive and engaging. If you have a question, please use the chat box or the Q&A function, and we'll be able to answer them at the end. So now, there are a lot of people on this screen. I'm sure that you're waiting to know who they are. So let's have them begin by introducing themselves. We'll have Elizabeth go first, and we'd love to know your name, your role, if you are an MBA alum, what class year did you graduate from? And if you are an alum, your employer and what your role is currently. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dickinson. I am a clinical associate professor of communication here in the Kenan-Flagler Business School, and my area of expertise in teaching and work and consulting and advising at Kenan-Flagler and across UNC is in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I currently teach our new core inclusive leadership course in the fall semester that Crystal actually just took this past weekend. So wonderful to meet you all.
Thank
I
you.
guess that brings it to me. My name is Crystal. I'm my first year at Kenan-Flagler. I'm also a liaison for the consortium as well as our community service committee, and am recruiting for consulting with a focus in sustainable enterprise. Nice to meet you.
Mitchell.
Thank you. Mitchell Dudas. I am an alumni class of 2017 where I focused on marketing and finance. Now working still in the triangle over in Raleigh, now working for a company called Alphanumeric Systems, and I am the director of learning and manager of finance, and have also been very actively involved in pushing forward our new DEI initiatives that we put into place this year.
Thank you. Patrick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patrick Gomez-Menzies. I am currently in Philadelphia as manager of early commercial strategy and diagnostics for GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals. I graduated from Kenan-Flagler with my MBA in 2019 and was focused on healthcare and data and digital analysis, and spent a lot of my time as the vice president of diversity for our MBA Student Association.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Sherry.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sherry Wallace, and I am the Executive Director of Engagement and Inclusion at UNC Kenan-Flagler. That is our DEI role that reports to the dean and is responsible for school-wide DEI coordination and initiatives. I am also a UNC Kenan-Flagler MBA grad, class of 1987. I spent about 13 years in brand management right after business school before joining my alma mater in various roles, from admissions to head of alumni, and this past year in the current role. So looking forward to sharing my experience with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And just to note, we will have Crystal drop off around 12:30 because she will be headed to class. And then we'll have another student, Malcolm Chapman, who is a dual degree candidate right now in the program, joining us at that time. But let's get talking about diversity. When you ask people, what is diversity and what is the value, everyone will have a different response. So would love to know your thoughts on how important diversity is to you and what value does it bring to the classroom and or company that you've worked for. And would love to have a faculty perspective kick this off. So Elizabeth.
Thank you. So yes, I'm in my, by the way, I have a 9-year-old who's in the 3rd grade who's virtual schooling. She's been told to stay out of the office unless it's an emergency, but if she comes busting in to look for tape, which constitutes an emergency in her mind, she might make a guest appearance. I'm in my 8th year at Kenan-Flagler, and I have a little bit of an unusual background to other faculty members. I come from the liberal arts and humanities, and so my master's and my PhD are in an area called critical intercultural communication. And it's been really interesting, along with Sherry, watching for the past 8 years, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives and issues and topics kind of ramp up. I think that we started this several years ago, and it's intensified each year. But it's been super interesting to see how the work basically infiltrates every component of a business school. We have to look at the students that we're admitting, and are they from historically underrepresented populations? And then not only that, when they get here, do they feel a sense of belonging and inclusion? Is there the notion of equity, of advocacy, of allyship, in some situations, even things such as justice within our student body populations? And then also we're working with our faculty. And so what we've really done in the last couple of years, and how important diversity is to me, is it's basically my life's work. I live, breathe dream and wake up from my dreams, commonly thinking about what we're doing in our school. But I think it's like you basically have to live under a rock to not understand how important these concepts are. I hope that wasn't a demeaning statement to anyone, but two organizations around the world, diversity, equity, and inclusion in business and organizations, in every industry, in my opinion, is basically the single most important topic of our time. It falls across so many different areas. And two things that we're doing within our full-time MBA program is we've created, I've been teaching an elective diversity, equity, and inclusion course for a number of years here. And this year, we basically translated it into a core required course for our first year incoming students. And so this semester, I have all 350 of our full-time students, along with others, sort of walking through this notion, and the class is called Inclusive Leadership. And it's basically, how do I, as a person within my organization, understand these complicated topics? How do I understand and manage conversation, especially across notions of difference? How do I engage in diplomacy with incredibly challenging situations? How do I think about revamping every single part of my organization, from recruiting and hiring, onboarding, organizational processes like performance reviews, managing teams, and a whole host of other things. And the second thing that we've been also doing here that I've been a huge part of is helping our faculty navigate these increasing topics that are coming into our classrooms. So in a nutshell, means the world to me, and then some, and in a nutshell, it's the most important topic of our time.
Great. Patrick.
I think diversity is extremely important to me. I think throughout my life and career, I've focused on advancing diversity and equity in all the organizations I've been a part of. I just think that there's so much opportunity to improve our society and experience wherever we are. And there's a lot of room to grow in diversity. For the pharmaceutical industry, I think that the value is clear in that it supports driving innovation, both in our R&D and our business side, improving decision-making. We spend a lot of time making a lot of high-risk decisions. A lot of our products end up failing and never reaching market. But being able to have a diversity of experience and background really helps us make those decisions better and earlier. And then understanding our customers and patients. We know that clinical trials struggle to recruit participants from diverse backgrounds. Different disease states have different backgrounds of who those people might be, and how do we reach out to them? How are we connecting with them in a way that allows them to have the best experience on our medicines?
So piggyback on what Patrick was saying, I come from a background in education, and which is not diverse enough. And my last role was supporting an organization. They're trying to increase the number of male educators of color and in the classroom, and we know how that impacts students' learning in the K-12, but even in the college level. And I think that the lack of representation in companies, as well as you have really diverse customers, not having that representation in your company is a detriment to your company, but also it creates a disconnect. And as far as like the classroom, I think that diversity is really important because it enhances, it's enhanced my experience having those different perspectives from where people come and what countries they're in, what sector they're in, and yeah, I think it's really enhanced what I've been able to take away in each of my classes.
And I would add that from my perspective, it's interesting because diversity was something I don't feel like I ever gave that much thought to growing up. I moved every 2 years when I was growing up, not just within the US, but internationally. I went to My undergrad in New York, spent 8 years in Manhattan, and if you don't appreciate diversity in Manhattan, you will get chewed up and spit out within your first few weeks. And so it wasn't actually until I left, I think, New York and came back to North Carolina for the first time after many years, and kind of was hit by this realization that, and not so much you tend, those of us that have attended UNC, Chapel Hill is this lovely little bubble of greatness, and the triangle itself, if you drive 20 minutes in any direction, you start to hear banjos playing sometimes. So, you know, you get kind of hit with this little bit of culture shock where I said, wow, I forgot how important it is for me to recognize that not everybody does share my views, that diversity is this beautiful thing that, as everybody on this panel has highlighted, permeates every aspect of your life, be that your education, your connections in business, your personal connections as well. So I think it cannot be underscored, and I think Professor Dickinson said it very well, that this is probably one of the single most important issues that we face today.
Absolutely. And Sherry, from your perspective, you know, being the Executive Director of Engagement and Inclusion and an alum of the MBA program, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, diversity, I think for me, very often people think of diversity. Years ago in admissions, we used to kind of call it making a patchwork quilt, where you have some of everybody, and that is beautiful. But the real, I think, benefits of diversity is the learning and the cross-pollination and the perspectives and the considerations that come with it. So for me, diversity in and of itself certainly represents access, and that is important. Who we see tells us a lot about who we are and who we can be. Yet for me, the real benefit of diversity is when you're genuinely creating those relationships where you're leveraging that diversity and that you're all growing from it. So that's become even more apparent to me as I've gotten older, and recognizing that it's more than just having some of everybody there, but it's really doing the hard work of leveraging everyone and testing yourself against all of the best talent, especially from the perspective of a student in an MBA program. Just saying I was in class with people from all these different backgrounds doesn't mean much if you didn't really leverage all those people and get to know them and have them rub off on you and you on them.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Sherry. You know, yes, you can say that you're in a class, but it's one thing to say that, but it's another to experience it. Diversity of thought, diversity of, you know, backgrounds of gender. It really is amazing to see once you all collaborate together. And as we think about that, and we think about, you know, C-suites and, you know, the conversations that are coming about, what do you all think is the biggest challenge facing leaders today in regards to diversity? And Mitchell, I'm going to kick this off to you because you mentioned that you're now in a position where you're trying to implement something at your company.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts and feelings about this, so I'll try to keep it brief. Otherwise, I'll end up using all our time. But one, I think if I were to summarize it actually in one word, it would probably be apathy. Is one of the biggest challenges I see right now, because I've been able to gain, what's the word I want to, I suppose I'll say support in conversations when I first brought the concept of DEI to the table. And so my company works very much in, you can think of us as kind of a contact center organization. That's what we do a lot of. So we supply a lot of bodies, and actually GSK is one of our customers, Patrick. So I'm very familiar with your clinical trials and what you go through there. And we have similar conversations around diversity of who am I bringing on to pick up that phone call. I'm hiring, you know, sometimes I'm hiring 100 people in a month to try to bring on these new desks. And you have to consider at every step of the way, you know, the real costs. And I can sit there and map out what it costs me every time I lose a person because they say And we've heard this, that there wasn't enough representation of this particular group, or the diversity was lacking. And so you can trace those things and put a real dollar value on it, which is the fantastic thing about where we are today in business, is I can actually have a conversation about diversity and show my CEO a very real bottom line impact of what happens if we don't take diversity and inclusion efforts seriously. And then the conversation often goes at executive levels, yes, well, I don't want to lose that money. We have to keep these people. Someone else is going to take care of that, right? It's like, no, we all have to do it. Every single person in this room, you don't pass this baton off. And even if you're fortunate enough, we're too small of an organization to have a CDO or anyone filling that type of role. It's something that every single one of us has to live and breathe. But even if you have that CDO or someone who's fully dedicated, or even a whole team of people, you still have to have more than just the sponsorship of, yeah, that's a great idea. You actually have to have the buy-in and the true engagement and involvement at every level of the organization.
Excellent. And I'm going to have Crystal go next, just to be mindful of time, because she does have class. So Crystal, do you mind sharing your thoughts? And then please, after that, feel free to hop off. We know class is very important, but I do appreciate you taking time to be here today.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of leave where Mitchell left off, I think about it from a student's perspective and what we're doing at Kenan-Flagler and Elizabeth's class, but also I think that our clubs have done an amazing job of providing that education to our peers about the barriers that different communities face in the workplace. And I think the challenge is, again, the work. It's hard work, and everyone wants to get behind diversity and inclusion, and but there's a lot of discomfort that it comes with that, and I don't think it until you're in the thick of it, it's very messy. I think that part of it is not that owning not being right, and undoing some learnings, and grace. A lot of like soft skills come into play when we think about how we can be more diverse, or like welcome more diverse workforce.
Excellent. Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. It takes work. And to Mitchell's point, it's not just one person. It takes a community, and bringing education and awareness to that. But Crystal, thank you so much for being here. Elizabeth, over to you from the educator standpoint.
Sure. Oh, I love Crystal. She was just, like I said, in the class last weekend. It's one of the true pleasures and privileges of my job, of being able to get exposure to so many totally amazing students, and us all walking along this journey of what the heck we're going to do with these very complicated topics. And I think that was something that I thought about when Mitchell was speaking, is two of the biggest mistakes that I see organizations and different industries make when it comes to this space is, number one, not acknowledging the complexity of the topic. I think we do a pretty big disservice when we try to simplify overly complicated topics. It's very hard work. It takes a very long time. I mean, oftentimes we think all we have to do is get an employee resource group, an ERG up and running, and then we're good to go. And so one of the biggest challenges for me, for Kenan-Flagler, for business schools everywhere, for organizations everywhere, is to also do all of the elements at the same time. So a big mistake that I see in my consulting work are, for example, organizations only focus on diversity, bringing people into the group, and how they define diversity depends on the population, right? So in nursing, it might be male nurses or different populations, but then not focusing at all on inclusion and belonging. And so it becomes a bit of a revolving door. And so it's one of the things that I've been doing lately is sort of reconceptualizing and establishing the importance first of inclusion and belonging. Because if you don't address those pieces, then you can get everyone you want in the room, but it doesn't have any stick. And it's been really interesting because I think that there is no such thing as a completely homogenous group. I mean, there are groups that are definitely more homogenous than others. But one of the things that I've been trying to do in my work here are to really help students understand the profound amount of diversity that exists within this space, and how can we build bridges, not even have to agree with each other. We don't have to, right? That how do we actually negotiate this really challenging space? And then so working on inclusion and belonging, and then diversity and also equity. So just because you bring people here, just because they feel like they belong, are they all being treated in a fair way? And then also notions of advocacy and allyship, and how do I actually extend that on to others? Hi, Malcolm.
Wonderful. And Sherry, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that I see, and I'll disagree a little bit with Crystal. Everybody's not behind diversity and inclusion. Many people are, and I think more people have gotten off the fence in the last year, but there are people in all of our lives and all of our institutions who aren't helping, and there are people who in fact might be blocking it. And so I think one of our challenges becomes not losing our motivation and not letting the fact that you can't get everybody enthusiastic keep you from getting the people who want to be. So that is one thing, but I think it's important to be honest that not everybody wants to do this work, and not everybody sees the need for it, which can be really, really hurtful if you're someone who is experiencing the impact of this work not being done, and it can be very frustrating. The other thing, and I think Elizabeth was getting to that when she was talking about the complexity, is the intersectionality of it all. I mean, most of us wear more than one diversity layer. And one of the things that I've certainly seen as difficult is that sometimes whatever you're not focused on can be seen by someone who really has a passion or a need or identification with that as not caring about that, even though you can't do it all. Our hope is that at the core of creating people who understand how to build authentic relationships, all of it will benefit, but it is difficult sometimes trying to figure out where to put the emphasis and where to put the resources. So those are the challenges, but I can honestly say that the rewards are when you move one person, or when someone makes an observation of how they've grown, or how they see something in a different way than they did before. It can be very satisfying, even as it is very hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. Malcolm, welcome. Glad to see that you could make it, and hope class went well. Would love for you just to share, introduce yourself and what year you are, and you're also in a dual degree program. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle. Glad to see everyone. And glad to be here. My name is Malcolm Chapman. As Danielle mentioned, I'm a dual degree MD MBA, currently in my first year at Kenan-Flagler. As far as sort of my background, I come from a background in research, specifically biomedical research, and then went to med school, and through that experience found an interest in sort of pursuing business and getting a little bit deeper into health system administration. But as far as my interest in being here today, I just personally think that diversity is one of the most important things that has recently had a light shined on it in the business world, in the healthcare world, really just across the spectrum. So, really here to sort of come from that perspective. And as far as my concentration here at Kenan-Flagler, I'm concentrating in operations management with a special enrichment in healthcare. So glad to be here.
Thank you. On the topic of UNC, leadership is an area of great importance at Kenan-Flagler. So how have you felt our school's commitment to leadership during your time as a staff member or as a student in Sherry's case? And Sherry, we'll have you kick this off.
Wow. Well, leadership has been an integral part. I think at Kenan-Flagler, one of the strengths is that we recognize that everybody doesn't start at the same place. So I think one of the most helpful parts of how we create and help people build on their leadership is some of the stuff that happens very early on in the assessments that students are able to do to just get a sense of where they are. We certainly had, over the time I've been here, I've seen various approaches to how we teach and develop leadership skills. But I think all of them have started with assessment, self-assessments, and understanding of maybe where you're already strong, what may be natural skills and abilities, and then where you may want to pick up some skills. I think it's important to know what to leverage, and maybe sometimes in where you need to stretch some. But it really all depends on a whole lot of things. And I think the assessments that we do have been a big part of the success. And I know people who kind of, now that I've seen so many years of graduates from our MBA program, people revert back to some of those leadership experiences later in their careers and are able to pull and draw from those things. And often when they talk about the things that have carried them, that they've carried the most or relied on the most, often ties back to something they did in the leadership building part of their career at the business school.
And that actually is a good transition to an alum's perspective. And Patrick, what's your opinion?
Definitely agree with Sherry that I look back on some of those leadership experiences and draw from them. I think I really liked the way that Kenan-Flagler approached leadership while as a student. There was structured learning as well as opportunities to really dive in and take a leadership position. So I think at any point, it's like 2/3 of our student body are in leadership positions. It's very student driven. We work with the administration of the school, with professors, with the community to really drive some of that forward. And so during my time there, worked with our Carolina Women in Business, our Pride Club, but also it's a second year, took the time to be on our MBA Student Association leadership and help with our 9 different diversity clubs as the VP of diversity, and really figure out ways that we can all work together to make some of that progress within Kenan-Flagler and help people with wherever they are in their leadership journey, and get them those skills in a safe place that they can use in the business world in the future.
And Malcolm.
Sure. I feel like I'm hearing Patrick speak, and it sounds so similar to what my experience has been, and I'm only in my first year, but I think leadership is a constant theme throughout the curriculum, especially thus far. As far as the sort of support of all levels of leadership, I think that's one of the things that comes through strong and has since I've gotten here. Not only do we arrive and then are sort of primed to go into these different leadership positions. Usually those clubs and organizations are opening those up in the first month or so. So you have a bit of a gap there where you can sort of consider where you're at. You can do sort of the activities that we're given. And I feel like for me, that gave me a better understanding of where I was at. And then additionally, working in groups, we each have a study group that we're with throughout our first year and believe our second year as well. And the amount of sort of one-on-one or one group to one advisor leadership that we get from that, I think is just invaluable. And we recently had a session where I feel like, you're continually uncovering areas of weakness, but also I think seeing it through a group lens allows you to sort of think about how other people may be taking that as a strength of yours, and sort of ways to reframe the way you look at what your weaknesses are. So I think there's a great support for leadership development, and I think that comes through strong even as a first-year student.
Excellent. And Mitchell, your thoughts, you know, being a recent alum, 3 years out, what's your thought and opinion on this?
Yeah, so I'll maybe share a quick personal anecdote. And so you probably heard Sherry say earlier that she's been involved in several areas of Kenan-Flagler since she joined, and she was actually the one who admitted me several years ago. And I remember even kind of in that very first moment, recognizing that there is a commitment to leadership, and that within that, there's also a commitment to diversity. I'm what you call a non-traditional MBA. I was a Broadway dancer before I applied to the program, had zero, quote, traditional work experience, and, you know, came to Kenan-Flagler where I immediately felt that that was not held against me. And I kind of look at it and look back on my experience now, and I still tell people to this day that emphasis on leadership is really, I think, what got me to where I am today. And I'm so grateful for it, because if I look at kind of the landscape of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, which is, you know, I have a huge financial responsibility within my organization and what I do, but today 2 + 2 = 4, tomorrow 2 + 2 = 4. Today Mike and Karen in a meeting equals productivity, tomorrow it might not, because Karen found out Mike voted for Trump and she's not happy about it. You know, there's so much nuance to what happens beyond these kind of, you know, the hard skills versus soft skills conversation that we all have. Those soft skills and your ability to be an effective leader is paramount, I believe, in your success post business school. I really do.
Wonderful. Now, flip the switch just a little bit. Elizabeth, I'd love to get your perspective on how do you create or how do you foster an open and communicative environment for MBA students in the classroom now that you are, you know, teaching this core class of inclusive leadership?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Malcolm was in the class a couple of weekends ago. Yeah, it's one of the hardest professional challenges of my life, to be quite honest. And I don't mean that as in a pessimistic way. I think it's just a very real situation. I put something in the chat that something that's really challenging is how do you foster, and this, Mitchell, you were just speaking to this as well, is how do you foster differences of opinion, differences in perspective. So I think it's really fascinating. This is not just at Kenan-Flagler, but in the business schools around the world, or particularly in the United States, is that you have people coming in from sort of, you know, these kind of traditional business fields, and then you have those from the arts and science, you know, the arts and the humanities, and then you have military folks and those in nonprofit and in education. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is work on a model where, and one of the biggest questions that people ask is, how do I create larger structural change? And one of the ways to do that is you start with the individual, you move along to the relationship, and then you work on changing organizational habits. And working on the individual is extremely hard work, because you have to be very honest with yourself. What mental associations am I making about people, and where are my blind spots, and do I have the courage to see my blind spots? And we all have them. If you don't think you got them, then that's your blind spot. And really just getting people to talk and each time I teach this class, I've taught 7 sections over the course of the semester. It gets kind of, it's like peeling back this layer more and more and more. And, you know, it's interesting because, so short answer to your question is just, what are people, this is going to sound like you're going into kind of the emotional intelligence realm, but what are people's concerns and fears when they're entering this space? So if you are an LGBTQ plus student, are you concerned with how you will be treated when you're here by your fellow peers? And a lot of people don't want to hear this, and I know that some people profoundly differ, but I think it's important to talk about, is what happens if you're a conservative student or a traditional student, and you know that you're coming back to universities which are historically liberal leaning, and you know that you can't come out in the classroom for fear that you'll be shamed. And then I am absolutely not saying that these two groups are the same, right? I mean, those are very different groups with very different repercussions. We have to be very careful about that. I think it's really interesting to see the fears and the apprehension that a lot of people experience, and how then do you get people to kind of disarm themselves and trust, you know, to trust in the process, to be vulnerable. I mean, some of the last things we're ever taught as leaders is to be vulnerable. Like, when has that been a classic definition of leadership, right? But we have to be vulnerable. We're going to make mistakes. We have to then develop relationships with each other. We have to get to know each other on a very intimate level. And then how do we do that with so many students? And then how then do we teach people how to change organizational habits and practices, both at Kenan-Flagler, which we've been doing for 100 years, and then the organization where you go, you know? So for example, in the organization where our performance reviews, how are your performance reviews? Are they great and equitable, or do they reek of nepotism and inefficiency and ineffectiveness? And if so, how can you actually change, you know, that space? So the short answer to the question is very carefully, very mindfully, and just with a lot of transparency that this is just tough work, and we're literally in the middle of doing it, and to some extent figuring it out as we're in the trenches, if you will.
Excellent. So Sherry, since you've been at Kenan-Flagler, you took some time away, but what are some of the programs or initiatives that Kenan-Flagler has put into place? I know that we've done quite a bit this year, but you have this history, but with Kenan-Flagler. But what has Kenan-Flagler put into place to make a difference for our students, our staff, our faculty, and visitors?
Sure, and I'll be the historian here. So, gosh, I've been associated with Kenan-Flagler since 1985 when I joined the MBA program. And I think it is important, Danielle, to look at it the way you just said it. The cycles don't end. Things that were put in place at one time serve their purposes maybe during that time, but are not sufficient moving forward. And I think Kenan-Flagler, like every other institution, this summer in particular, you know, had to go back and go deeply into doing some things. But one of the first things that I was personally a part of is when I was a student, we did not have very many minority students in our class. The class size was probably about half the size as it is now. But we were having, you know, really good experience, and we felt that that more Black and at that time Latino students would be interested if they knew more about us. And so we went to the MBA program office and worked with them to create a weekend visitation program that is now inside Kenan-Flagler. I was also part of the class that created the school's first Alliance for Minority Business Students. And so something that one of the students or former students mentioned was that Kenan-Flagler has always been the kind of an organization where students have had strong ability to create things that they think would make a difference, just like the last year started the Black Business Student Association. I think the minority community has developed such that what might have been sufficient for minority students back when I was here with the Alliance of Minority Business Students, African American and other Black students have needed even more focused programming and support. So I was really happy to see that evolve. Some of the things that we've done recently, and I've been working with the Dean's Office as well as across the programs on, are trying to institutionalize more of the, creating this systems and infrastructure to support a more inclusive environment. So there are things, everything from relooking at the school's core values to creating, redoing space and the building. Hopefully we'll all be back in the building soon so everybody can appreciate that. We have a tool that we've developed. We've had to put some more tweaks on it, but it is a tool to allow all members of our community, faculty, staff, students, to let us know when things are happening that are highly supportive of an inclusive community, but also things that we might want to be aware of so that perhaps we can get involved sooner on things that might be working against us having the inclusive community that we all see. We've added some prompts to the class surveys that students fill after every class that specifically probe for inclusion and diversity in the classroom space. Elizabeth posted in the chat not so long ago some of the work we're doing to make our faculty more capable of having, somebody said this is hard work, this is awkward work, we're not all wired the same. Some of us are very comfortable talking about feelings and hurt, and there are other people that are not, and not all leaders have the language or the training to intervene sometimes in things. And so everybody is just trying to get better. Also working on trying to increase our diversity pipelines for talent, for student talent, for staff and faculty talent, and for quality and equity once people are in our employed at the school. So there's a lot of different facets. I would say inclusive education, inclusive environment, having representation in the student, faculty, and staff. Those are all of the things that we're working on right now. And we can celebrate some victories. We still have a whole lot more work to do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. We have about 8 minutes left, and I would please feel free to continue to put in your questions. I see that some have been answered as just a natural conversation, but please, if there's anything else that you have to ask, please continue to do so. I'd like to ask each of the panelists in 60 seconds or less a question about looking towards the future. For this next incoming class or for the future incoming classes here at Kenan-Flagler, what would be your charge for them to continue the diversity, equity, and inclusion environment at UNC? And we'll start with Mitchell first.
I think for me, a lot of it comes back to some of the stuff Sherry was just touching on, and it's openness, and I think Elizabeth said it too, it's vulnerability, and just recognize that your definition of diversity and how you think about it has its own bias that you carry with it just because of your experiences. So just being open, and I have seen, I'll kind of, rather than talk about what I think might need to change or be different, I'll just talk about I want to see this continuing, because in the 5 years since my first interaction with Kenan-Flagler, I have seen dramatic changes. And I very much believe that the leadership and really every level that exists within the Kenan-Flagler family is open to it. So I would really just ask that, if you're looking at coming and joining that family, that you bring that to the table and join what is already there. Be open to the conversation and see where it takes you.
Cool. And Malcolm, as a current student, what are your thoughts and the charge that you'd like to see?
Sure. Yeah, I think, sort of following Mitchell's idea of, you're joining a collection of people, creating all these new different groups, and you're inevitably going to come in contact with, different ways of thinking. I think sort of getting at things that have been mentioned, we don't wear our biases on the surface. And I think part of the way we have to approach this and how new students can approach this is just recognizing, you've got to be open. You've got to not stop, and not stopping, I think, is key. We can't stop having conversations. And it's really tempting to, sort of shut down or close yourself off, or try and, find people who are going to align perfectly with where you're coming from. But I think one of the things I've seen, and, I've had the fortune of working and becoming a leader in like Black Business Student Association and hearing all sorts of opinions, is that there's students here who their intention is to not stop. And I don't think they will ever stop. And I think that people who are entering should remain open and try and see things from that point of view, that this is an effort that has gone on and will continue to go on as we uncover new areas that may separate us as individuals. But, I think the better we can understand each other, the better it'll serve us, socially interacting in whatever, business that you may be in later on. But also as students, I think the learning is, sort of taken to a whole new level if you can just try and hear people out, understand where they're coming from.
Wonderful. And Patrick, you did a lot of work here at UNC during your time in this space. What do you like to see students do in the future?
I think I'd like to see students continuing to work together. I think that there's such an opportunity to leverage our diverse experience, our diverse class that comes to Kenan-Flagler, and no one group or person really can do it alone. We get a lot more done when we work together, when we pull in our classmates, when we help others that might not be specifically related to something that is about us, but about the community.
Great. And Elizabeth?
Just to ditto on what everyone has said, just to be able to come and be willing to do the hard work. That's what we need, regardless of where you're from.
That's beautiful. And Sherry, saving you for your response on this one. What would you like to see?
I would just encourage people to be you. There are a number of people who are doing the heavy lifts, the people who are putting themselves out there, the people who are doing classes like what Elizabeth is doing. We have students that haven't always been on the positive side of somebody's DEI behavior, let's say. And, and I just want to thank them for continuing to show up and continuing to learn and continuing to teach. And I'm an optimist. I grew up in the 60s. So this isn't my first rodeo, what we're dealing with today. I know that that all of us are going to be smarter, stronger, and better equipped if we do the work. It's not 100% easy, but I believe that this is a kind of place where if you come in and if you're willing, we can help you develop a lot of those tools and relationships that are going to position you to be an incredible leader moving forward.
Absolutely. And each of you, the panelists and the attendees, you all showed up today and to learn and talk more about this topic. And we need more people like you and as business leaders and leading the change here, not only at Kenan-Flagler, but in everywhere. So I want to thank Elizabeth, Patrick, Mitchell, Malcolm, Sherry, and Crystal for being here today, and most importantly to our attendees as well. I really hope that you take away some key components of what we discussed today about being, vulnerable, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable at times, but we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that it's going to take all of us to make that change happen. So we thank you, we appreciate you, and if you do have questions, I'm going to put in here the email address for our general inbox, and if you do have specific questions, I'd be happy to forward that along to our panelists if they didn't have that in here, but thank you all so much. And thank you to Clear Admit and Mike for being here as well and for arranging this. How about we do one, cheer for UNC that we all know, which is go Heels. And that will be the end for us. So on the count of 3, we'll yell go Heels and sign up. So 1, 2, 3. Go
Go
Heels.
Heels.
Go Heels.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. We
Thank
hope
you,
you have an
everyone.
amazing day
Thank you,
and
Danielle.
keep up the great work.